Ryan, take it away.
All right. Well, I'll cut my talk down a little bit so we can get out of here at 5:30 because it is awfully hot. Who knows what intellectual property is? Ooh, what is it?
It's establishing property over something that you
Establishing property over something you've created. I like that. And protecting it legally. I like that too, right? Property protections for certain intangible products of the mind, right? Which is an interesting question if you have a mind that's an artificial intelligence, whether you could protect that sort of thing. Which is only one of the many issues facing AI with intellectual property. Hearings are going on right now in US Congress about how to protect intellectual property and artificial intelligence. Jim earlier this morning said there are all of these legal and social and ethical issues, and we should have, policymakers deal with that. And for any of you who follow government or politics right now, I hope that comment struck terror into your hearts, because that's what we're here for, at least in the law department, and our law department's full of people doing ethics. So just to highlight a few ways that AI and IP collide with each other, how do you protect AI with IP? For those of you who are making it, you may be making it for fun here at Surrey, or trying to get grant money, or getting yourself an academic position. Businesses, though, their first question, whether they're asking you or not, is how am I going to make money from your artificial intelligence, right? And the answer may be, well, we get a patent on it, or we protect it with trade secret, or AI code has copyright, right? So if you write your own AI code, it's copywritten. No one can copy it and use it without your permission anywhere in the world from the minute you write it. Doesn't protect how the AI functions, though. So if someone can look at your code and rewrite it, that's no protection for you. A lot of companies, people spoke about the problems with transparency and algorithmic black boxes, right? This is a problem for a lot of reasons, but also companies don't want to share their code, not only because maybe if you look under the hood, what they're doing isn't as kosher as they say it is, but also because their competitive advantage, maybe no one can see their code and what they're doing. They just want to share their outcomes. And if you compel them to share this code, competitors could essentially copy it. So that's a big problem with it. Traditionally, you can't get patents on artificial intelligence, except you can get patents on computer-implemented inventions, which are essentially artificial intelligence. And in the US, they're thinking right now of doing away with that whole thing and just saying you can get a patent on whatever you want. But we'll see how that goes, right? Data is very important to AI, particularly connectionist systems like artificial neural networks we're going to learn about tomorrow. By the way, by background, I'm a physician scientist, so a medical doctor with research training in the United States. I really don't know anything about computer science, but I talk about it pretty much all the time now. So I'll just share that with you. Data, as you know or will know or should know, is important to training these types of machines. So data has a lot of value in the AI space. Sometimes data is really the most valuable part of this equation. How do you protect data with intellectual property? You can't patent data. You usually can't copyright data in general. You can copyright databases. So if you go to a lot of work making a big AI database, you can protect that database with intellectual property. But the protection's only so good. So data is another thing a lot of AI companies protect by keeping it secret, right? Google won't give you their data for lots of reasons, privacy being one, but also they don't want to let someone else have their AI train on this data. I think the most interesting thing, and one of the things I've spent the most time on, is protecting AI outputs with intellectual property. So if an AI autonomously makes something, can you get intellectual property protection for it? And perhaps the two big sources of intellectual property protection are copyright for artistic and media works, things like books and movies and songs, and patents on things like inventions, or patents if you're from the United Kingdom, or elsewhere in the English-speaking world. So what happens if a machine writes a book? I was speaking with a journalist during one of the breaks and reminding him that within the past couple of years there was a study showing people can't tell the difference between a robo-journalist piece and a real journalist piece if it's for sort of a short, simple article. And he said the journalistic community was fairly aware of this study and also generally terrified by it. But if you can't copyright something made by a robo-journalist, then anyone else can copy it and use it for whatever they want. Similarly, for a patent, if you can't get a patent on an AI output, someone could copy it and use it for whatever they want. Traditionally, in intellectual property law, rights go to authors and inventors. And you usually can't have a company be an author or an inventor. Some of this is an important part of new business strategies. So this was IBM's Watson brand, famously winning a game of Jeopardy in 2012, I think. Ancient history in AI terms. They now have a Watson Insight business model where companies give IBM big data. IBM runs the data through Watson, which is a whole bunch of different algorithms. Watson produces insights, and by contract, the insights go to the clients can patent the insights, the clients thus own the insights. But it's not really clear there who the inventor is in something like that. The client's not the inventor, they just commissioned research. IBM's not an inventor because a company can't be an inventor. Maybe the people who program Watson, which should be hundreds of people, but not if they're programming Watson kind of without really expecting the problem it's going to solve. Maybe the people who gave Watson data, but not if they just gave it all the data. And maybe the people who interpreted the output, but not if it just says, here's a better plane wing design. Sometimes the conceptual work of invention has been done by the machine, and we really don't have any law to deal with that. Recently, I spoke at an event held by the UK IPO and WIPO, that's the UK Intellectual Property Office and the World Intellectual Property Office, at London Stadium, which touched on this topic. It was interesting because they were redoing the baseball pitch for the Red Sox-Yankees game and said, if anyone takes a picture of this baseball pitch, we're going to expel you from the event. Everyone took pictures of the baseball pitch. But among other things, I said to them, why aren't we allowed to take pictures? They said, well, Major League Baseball said so. And I said, but there's a picture of it on the front page of the newspaper today. And they said, yeah, we know, but you still can't take pictures of it. Anyway, that was a moderate digression. But at an event on this, it was pretty much just filled with lawyers. And some very good lawyers, including a Supreme Court justice, but really very few people talking about whether AI could actually do this stuff, like whether it's just a tool or whether it's functionally inventing. So just to double down on my comment that I don't know anything about computer science, but I'm going to speak about it anyway, I wanted to briefly present the contours of how something like this can work. And I understand John's going to have us actually making these tomorrow, which is very exciting. But this is the basic concept of a neural network involving successive layers of neurons, interpreting neural activation patterns they've previously seen. They can store information conceptually, not in individual neurons, but by recognizing different activation patterns and connection weights between neurons. So if you have a concept like grandma in your brain, it's not stored in a particular neuron. You don't have a grandma neuron. You have a group of neurons that activate in a particular activation pattern when you think about that concept. Or if you think about a cappuccino, you'll have neurons that activate in visual portions of your cortex that form associations with something like a cappuccino. You may have olfactory associations. You may have oral associations. Words may come to mind, but activation patterns in the brain hold conceptual information, right? People store it a bit differently, some more complex, some in others. But tokenized representations of concepts that are not stored in English but are stored in connection weights. This is one particular representation of an artificial neural network where the neurons have been removed and the connection weights are just the lines, and you show it patterns of information, it changes its connection weights and reassembles them. The more information you show it, the more the network develops. And the network can start generating novel information by stimulating itself with noise or perturbing its own connection weights. So it has stored a bunch of patterns of information. As it changes its own network weights, this information gets corrupted and essentially sends out false information. You can have another neural network that's a critic or a monitoring network to look at this and compare this corrupted output to its training data and saying this is something new I haven't seen before. This is also the GAN architecture people were talking about that Google has popularized. This is a particular project I'm working on with someone who's developed an AI that he calls DABUS and a creativity machine, which is like the GAN architecture. Essentially, when you get to the level of networks doing this, networks store conceptual information and they can behave like individual neurons. And so when they meet thresholds, they can fire conceptual information off so that this can work together to form complex ideas. You may have a neural network that has stored the concept of academic, and another of lecture, another for boring, another for escaping. And then when it gets to things like jumping out windows equals death, device to save you, you can get complex ideas forming from the way that these networks connect to one another. So things like, we need a device to escape out of a window without dying to avoid a boring academic lecture. Not the only sort of system that can come up with new information, so genetic programming does this. This is another sort of architecture that changes its own programming or connection weights. So essentially it relies on evolutionary biology and processes that occur there, mutations, sexual reproduction, recombination of its own code, and it continues to change its own code until its output starts to meet pre-set criteria. So John Koza, who invented something called the invention machine, and he also invented the scratch-off lottery ticket, although that was not from the machine. He programmed it to develop a new controller. He gave it fitness criteria for what he wanted the controller to do. He gave it some publicly available schematics of controllers, and it proceeded to invent a new controller that he got a patent on, and that was back in the year 2000. Although he didn't list the machine's involvement, he just named it himself. Anyway, so hopefully that wasn't too technically inaccurate, but machines are functionally inventing, and this is important for intellectual property law because it isn't clear that a computer-generated work like this could have IP at all. It isn't clear if it could have IP, who would own it, and it isn't clear who would be the author or the inventor. This case came up a few years ago in the monkey selfies. Did anyone hear about this? Oh, you didn't hear about the monkey selfies. So this was a UK-based photographer, David Slater, who went to Indonesia to take pictures. And there's two versions of the story. In the first version, he told he left his camera out, a crested macaque came by, took a bunch of pictures of itself. And in a later version of the story, he painstakingly created the conditions for a monkey to come by and take pictures of itself. But he put these photos up online. They proved very popular. People started using them without his permission, and he started sending them cease and desist letters. And so the question came up, can this have copyright? It's not a computer, but it's not a person either, right? If this is an intangible product of a mind, does a monkey have a mind, or a mind we want to incentivize creativity in? So the US Copyright Office said, monkeys can't get copyright. They said, actually, since 1973, we've been denying any intellectual property protection for something made not by a person. So we have a human authorship requirement. It wasn't a new policy, but they updated their human authorship requirement to specifically say photographs by monkeys cannot get protection. And that seemed to resolve it until PETA sued on behalf of the monkey, Naruto, PETA being the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. In California District Court, they sued David Slater, alleging that the monkey was the copyright owner, he was infringing the monkey's copyright, and he was liable for substantial damages. That case went to the Court of Appeals in California, and sadly it never really got considered. They threw it out because the Court of Appeals said, if Congress wants a monkey to sue, they're going to have to tell us a monkey can sue, and otherwise monkeys can't sue. So there went that case. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, since 1984 has had the opposite policy. So in the United Kingdom, if a machine autonomously makes something that can receive copyright, you can have copyright. And the person who is considered the author is the producer of the work, which is to say the person who undertakes to have the work made. That's like a film producer. So if you commission something from an autonomous machine and it does it, you own the copyright in it. You're the author. But there's no law in the United States or the United Kingdom or really anywhere about what to do if a machine invents something, right? And in my work, I've argued that not only should we protect computer-generated inventions, but the machine should be the inventor, with the machine's owner owning its inventions. And the reason for this is the reason we have patent protection in the first place, which is primarily to incentivize innovation, right? We think that if we didn't have patents, you would get a suboptimal amount of innovation. Like in the drug industry, they say it takes £2 billion to get a new drug approved. That's a disputed figure, but they say the only reason the whole enterprise works is we get patents on drugs, and then if a drug gets approved, we get to make a lot of money, because if you have a patent, you are the only person allowed to sell it, so you can set whatever price you want. A little more complicated than that, but basically that. So it's true that machines don't care about getting patents, but people who build machines care about getting patents. And so if perhaps the way we're going to usher in a whole bunch of exciting new innovation is inventive machines, we want to create incentives for companies like DeepMind and IBM to be building things that can innovate. And so we want to allow these things to then receive patent protection. And if the machine is doing the functional act of invention, it's fairest to note the machine, not fair to the machine, which doesn't care about acknowledgement, but fair to other human inventors who are inventing without machines, so their accomplishments are properly acknowledged. It would also acknowledge the important work of computer developers who could take pride in their inventions. Of course, machines wouldn't own patents. That doesn't make any sense for all sorts of reasons. And you could have different parties owning it, like the user of a machine, the owner of a machine, or the developer of a machine. I think the owner of a machine works best. Interesting to think, though, if you're a believer in artificial general intelligence or the singularity, which most people are generally, although wildly different opinions on the timeline for this. This is from Ray Kurzweil, who has a fairly optimistic singularity trajectory, which he attributes to the law of accelerating returns, which is all of these disruptive technologies you're going to see are going to build in on each other, or, well, that's not the right word, but they're all going to work together to bring about a machine that's smarter than a person. You know, robots have been working as journalists, as I said to that fellow, for decades. They just haven't been very good at it, right? And now they're getting to a point where they can replace journalists for certain basic things. Right? It may be in 10 years that computers and inventive machines are the standard way that R&D is conducted, you know, particularly some sorts of R&D where machines have really great advantages. In biologics, for example, which is a branch of drug discovery, all the major blockbuster biological drugs are monoclonal antibodies like Humira. Those are drugs making over $1 billion a year. There's only so many ways to make an antibody, right? Billions or trillions of ways, but that's about it. And that's enough ways for your body to fight any infection. But for a sufficiently powerful computer, it's not that many different types of antibodies. Google's AlphaFold, or DeepMind's AlphaFold, recently outperformed 50 other teams in its first year competing in a protein folding competition. So AlphaFold did a much better job at predicting how proteins would fold than other computers that have been at this for a long time. And that's a critical task in drug discovery. You could have a very intelligent computer sequencing every conceivable antibody, genetically sequencing epitopes, which are the things antibodies bind to, predicting their binding, predicting their clinical responses, and you could completely change the way drug discovery is done. And there are companies like Benevolent AI working on this in London. We'll see how they do. Thank you.